Please welcome to the stage Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Dr. Rachel Kleinfeld.
So let me start by stating the absolute obvious. Americans have just been through a really tough election, and so have a lot of other places around the world. Many folks are not excited to find common ground with people they fear want to end their democracies or erase their identities. And so talking about pluralism makes some people a little wary. It sounds a bit too close to let's all just get along. That is not what I want to talk about here today. I want to invite us into a very different conversation. A conversation about how we create major change, radical change, that can be sustained over time in diverse communities. Pluralism is one response to diversity, but it's not the only one. In fact, it's not even the main one. Historically, there have been two others that are much more common. The first is hierarchy. The strongest group gets to keep enough political and social power that they set the rules for society. Everyone else kind of fits themselves around the dominant group or fits themselves into it. The other frequent response is repression. That may mean mass expulsion. It may even mean mass killing. And it can certainly involve changing rules on immigration or making some identities illegal, such as criminalizing gay life. So I want to pause there for just a moment. Having one group dominate or mass repression are the two most common ways to deal with diversity. Pluralism is the third response. Pluralists say there should not be one dominant identity. Instead, people of different backgrounds, beliefs, idea sets should all be treated equally. That legal and social tolerance is a bare minimum, but most pluralists take it to level 2. They say pluralism means that engaging across difference makes society stronger. Now, it's easy for some people to believe they're natural pluralists. All my life, I've loved different foods, different cultures, different peoples. The hard work is not that. The hard work is whether we can engage when we feel threatened. That's hardwired to be tough because humans evolved over the last 300,000 years, mostly in tribes of pastoralists or hunters. And in that time, the hormone oxytocin grew with us to support forming strong bonds with us. And that very same hormone makes you aggressive toward outsiders. So in other words, we're not naturally altruistic, nor are we naturally competitive. We're naturally helpful to our tribe and defend against other tribes. So the issue really is, how do you define your tribe? Who's your us? My tribe involves a lot of difference, but there is a them. It excludes people who don't like engaging across difference. If I meet someone who doesn't like new experiences, doesn't want to try new foods, doesn't want to go to new countries, frankly, my first instinct is to look down my nose at them. And if I'm honest, there's a big group of people I just don't like engaging with. I would be more comfortable if people who didn't like difference were not a part of my community. Now, how ironic is that? We need to admit we have these instincts too, because the only way you make the other side disappear from your community is one of those two non-pluralist strategies, repression or dominance. And that is precisely what many people fear. People fear that progressives worry that traditional thinkers want to reassert the traditional hierarchy. And traditionalists worry that progressives also want dominance, but that they just want to create a new hierarchy, one that turns the other one upside down. In the US, for instance, putting white Christian men on the bottom and everyone else on top. And people also worry about repression for pretty good reason. They look at the closing of schools or businesses during COVID, and they think it shows progressives also want everyone else to conform if they get the chance. They feel the quick shifts in social rules on language and behavior mean that progressives want to silence people who don't agree, or push people who hold different views out of their organizations, especially out of universities, which are essential to life chances. And if we're honest, there are plenty of people who do feel that way because it can feel existential. It can feel like you're defending yourself against getting erased. But in a polarized democracy, that instinct to win big and force everyone else to accept your beliefs can never create change that lasts. Your side changes things when you hold power. When the other side gets power, they erase every gain you've just made, and maybe then some. And so that brings me to the third level of pluralism. Level 1, treating all groups equally. Level 2, believing difference is positive and makes us stronger. Engaging with people across difference in order to act together is level 3. And in its fullest conception, pluralism involves finding the goals you share with very different people and building lasting majorities that can work together to improve society. Now, this requires curiosity. If I believe everyone who votes differently than me is racist, sexist, misogynist, intent on destroying my very selfhood, there's no point. I'm not going to engage with those people because nothing I want to get done involves authoritarianism, racism, or misogyny. But are those assumptions correct? Could the other side be more complex than I'm willing to give them credit for? Could I be more complex than they're willing to give me credit for? Let's be really concrete. I'm privileged in many, many ways, and that gives me some added comfort dealing with difference. But everyone's got a hard no somewhere. And I'm a pretty visibly Jewish woman who works on political violence quite a lot. So I'm not saying, go have a chat with that neo-Nazi waving the "Jews will not replace us" sign. He may not be so bad. There is a line where it becomes impossible to engage. Isaiah Berlin, who's my favorite philosopher, acknowledged the pluralist does not have to accept ideas that are hostile to the pluralist society's existence or to the pluralist's existence. You have to have some commonality on democracy and the rule of law. You can only accept a diversity of ideas within that framework. But within that, there's actually a ton more room than most of us acknowledge. So I'm not telling you go out and engage with people you fear, who want to use violence or intimidation. What I'm saying is, don't assume everyone who votes for a party or a policy is that flag-waving neo-Nazi. Don't assume all party supporters are the same as the party leaders. If people are arrayed on a spectrum, sure, don't go after that hard 10% at the edge, but what about the next 10? What about the next 10? Better yet, don't array everyone on a single line. Most people are much more eclectic than that. It flattens complex identities to just string them out this way. What if someone makes a sexist remark? Do I write them off on everything? Sometimes I want to, but maybe I agree with them on climate change. Maybe they agree with me on raising wages. What if they agree with me on a lot more? That's hard. Some people love engaging across difference, and I do not. I would much rather be home with my kids or my cats. I push myself because I want to do big things. If we refuse to accept this world as it is and we live in a diverse society, we cannot shrink the coalition of people who might be on our side in important fights. Wherever possible, we need to work for addition, not subtraction. That's pluralism. And pluralism can achieve remarkable, almost impossible things. When we moved from those small tribes to complex societies about 5,000 years ago, those societies were authoritarian. From the Middle East to Asia to Latin America, a small group of leaders, usually kept in place by religious societies, kept the mass of humanity mired in poverty and often in slavery. Those early societies gave way to monarchies and colonialism, which was frankly not a whole lot better. Democracy is a tiny blip in historical time. Pluralistic democracy is even infinitesimally smaller. And yet, in that tiny space with all their flaws, that blink in time has brought the greatest wealth, education, rights for women, rights for children, minorities, of any system that has ever existed on Earth. It's true that recent years have been pretty hard on a lot of us. And it is also true that the last 50 years have been the best time to be alive for the majority of people on the planet since the world began. In just the years since I was in high school, the world ended a brutal totalitarian dictatorship, pulled billions of people out of poverty, educated millions of girls, and violence has fallen in every possible way, from civil war to homicide. And much of that was because of people engaged in the conscious work of pluralism. For example, millions of lives in Africa have been saved from AIDS by PEPFAR funding, a US program that only came to be because the rock star Bono, a pretty liberal guy, teamed up with Republican Senator Jesse Helms, known as a fairly reactionary conservative. That reduction in global violence, well, Shamal Idris is here, and he runs the world's biggest organization to fight violence, and he will explain later that a lot of that work requires bringing people together who would be the spoilers for peace, the people who would fight against it, and engaging with them to get them on board. And then, over the last 10 or 15 years, all this progress has slowed. Pluralism says building durable change requires pulling together unlikely allies, creating broad majorities that don't disappear when the political winds blow the other way. But many people didn't get taught this tradition. We started living online. We lost a lot of the skills needed to handle the friction of real relationships, just as our societies became more diverse, and we needed this more than ever. And meanwhile, we started teaching the world to scan for threats and see those threats as so dire to people's sense of self that even classroom discussions started making people feel unsafe. That mindset makes us feel more brittle. It's the opposite of building resilience. No surprise, anxiety and mental health issues have skyrocketed, particularly for progressives, particularly for liberal young women. That's not progress. That's paralysis. If we spend all our time internally policing whether someone's using the right language, we cripple the organizations we need to do their missions. As Diasia Price, the DEI director at the School of Social Work at Michigan, explained, social justice is not screaming and fighting and yelling at people. We can't increase justice if we're creating ever smaller, ever purer groups that agree. Instead, we have to make room for complexity, for half agreement, for give and take. Now, that does not mean giving ground on your core values. It means engaging to explore where you might actually have agreement on core values, often unexpected agreement that you can build on. In the US, the Respect for Marriage Act solidified the right to gay and interracial marriage. It only took us until 2 years ago. That was hardly a time of bipartisan love and affection. But it had overwhelming support. Over 100 extra votes in the House, 2/3 of the Senate voted for it. That's a lot of people who disagree on just about everything, but were willing to make it the law of the land that a family was what you made it. Now, that bill had failed in 5 previous Congresses. It passed only when supporters really engaged the religious groups that had disagreed before and found ways to answer their concerns while still robustly supporting the right to marry who you want. It is this realization that change is possible that makes it absolutely imperative for those of us who are change makers to be serious about how to get from here to there. For those of us who want to see a better society, we must engage with those different than us and find out where we agree. That's how we make our agenda a majority agenda. Pluralism is not something we can leave to the experts. It's not something we can donate to others to do. It requires each of us to get involved with the messiness of real life. And the reward is the better world that we all get to conjure into being. Thank you so much. Good luck today.